Caleb Wynne was 37 years old the morning. His wife handed him a cardboard box and told him to be out of the house by Friday. She was still in her robe. She had a cup of coffee in her other hand. She passed him the box the way you pass someone their dry cleaning, without ceremony, without weight, as though the contents of a 12-year marriage were simply something to be sorted and transferred. He took the box. He did not say anything immediately. He stood in the doorway of the house on Prescott Lane that he had bought in both their names 6 years earlier. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, and what he saw on her face was not cruelty exactly, but something worse than cruelty. The specific, composed expression of a woman who had already decided what this was, and who had, at some point he could not precisely identify, stopped caring what he thought about it. "The deed's already been redrawn," she said. "My attorney took care of it last month. It's all legal." He looked at the box. He looked at her. He said quietly, "Okay." She laughed. It was a short sound, almost fond. "That's it? Just okay?" He nodded. Just okay. She was still smiling when she closed the door. What Vanessa did not know, what she had not once considered in 12 years of looking at a man she had decided was small, was that the mortgage on that house, the one she'd just had redrawn in her name alone, the one she would be servicing for the next 22 years, was held by a community development institution called Meridian Lending Partners. She had signed the original paperwork at a long oak table in an office on Union Avenue. She had initialed every page. She had been impressed by the notary's seal, an embossed crest she had admired without reading. She had no idea that Caleb Wynne was Meridian's majority equity holder, its founding architect, the man who had sat on its lending board since the institution opened its doors. She had no idea that she had just laughed at the man who held her mortgage. What came next would take 11 months. It would cost Vanessa every single thing she believed she had secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning after he left, Caleb was at his mother's kitchen table in a house in Orange Mound that still smelled the way it had smelled since his childhood. Chicory coffee, lemon dish soap, the faint cedar of the closet his grandmother had lined by hand. He had not slept particularly well. He had slept, which he considered a reasonable performance given the circumstances, but not particularly well. He drank the coffee his mother, Estelle, set in front of him without being asked, and he looked out the window at the small backyard, with its raised beds and its old fig tree and its cracked concrete birdbath that had been cracked for as long as he could remember. He felt the particular quality of a morning that asks nothing of you, which was exactly what he needed. Estelle Wynne was 63 years old and had taught 4th grade in Memphis public schools for 31 years, which meant she had spent 3 decades learning to read what a face was not saying while appearing to pay attention to something else entirely. She sat across from him with her own coffee and said nothing for a long while, which was its own form of wisdom. When she did speak, she said only, "You want eggs?" She said yes. She got up and made them. He was a quiet man by nature, and more than that, a patient one. His grandfather, Thomas Wynne, spent 34 years in residential mortgage servicing, and had built in that time a small but deeply understood expertise in the machinery of institutional lending. How money moved, where it pooled, what made a loan sound and what made it fragile, what made a borrower a partner and what made him a liability. He used to say, "Every number has a story." Most people only read the first sentence. Caleb had heard that for the first time at age 11, sitting at another kitchen table in another Orange Mound house that was gone now, the kind of Saturday morning when his grandfather would spread out his work ledger and trace a column of figures with one finger and explain, slowly and without condescension, what each line meant in the life of a real family. He had carried that habit of reading the whole story with him ever since. The way you carry something you didn't know was load-bearing until the day it holds everything up. He had met Vanessa at a fundraiser for a neighborhood revitalization initiative. in South Memphis, 9 years before they were married. She was in commercial interior design, dressed in a way that was precise without being rigid. She laughed loudly and genuinely, and had a way of making the people around her feel noticed in a room where most people were working too hard to notice anyone. He had liked her immediately and specifically. The specificity of how she listened, the tilt of attention she gave each person who spoke to her. They had dated for 3 years, been engaged for 1. During those years, she had been warm and curious and fully present in a way that he had trusted completely. He had built things for her. A reading alcove she'd mentioned wanting, a kitchen island from reclaimed wood, herb garden along the south-facing fence. He had done all of it because he wanted to, and because he had believed that building things for someone was one of the clearest languages he knew. He did not know exactly when she stopped speaking that language back. He suspected it was gradual. He suspected it was the kind of change that happens so incrementally that by the time you can name it, the shape of it is already finished, the way a foundation settles over years into a new position, and the cracks only become visible, all at once, long after the movement has stopped. She had started spending more time with a man named Derek Ashworth, a local architect with a firm in Cooper Young and a profile in a regional design magazine, in the particular easy confidence of someone for whom things had always arranged themselves neatly around his preferences. Caleb had noticed. He had asked once, gently and without accusation, whether something had changed between them. Vanessa had said he was being insecure. He had accepted that answer longer than he should have. He acknowledged that to himself plainly, without self-pity, sitting at his mother's kitchen table in the smell of shigori and cedar. He had been slow. He had not been blind. The cardboard box she'd given him had his grandfather's field ledger in it. The worn brown notebook, pages dense with Thomas Wynn's careful hand, and the compressed numerals of 34 years of careful attention. He did not think she had put it in there on purpose. She had probably not known what it was. He picked up his regular phone, then set it down and picked up the other one. The one with the Meridian account access, the board correspondence, the institutional dashboards, and held it for a moment without opening it. He looked at the fig tree in the backyard. One of the branches had split in the last storm and was hanging at a tired angle. He made a note to fix it. His regular phone buzzed. Text from a Memphis number he did not recognize. An address on Lombardy Way and a time. Thursday, 7 p.m. He showed it to Estelle. She looked at it. She looked at him. Something passed across her face that was not surprise. "I think," she said carefully, setting his eggs in front of him. "You need to go to that address." He went. The house on Lombardy Way belonged to a woman named Sandra Pruitt, who was 61 years old, worked for 28 years as a paralegal at a family law practice in Midtown, and who had been Vanessa's godmother since Vanessa's baptism. She opened the door in a cardigan, assessed Caleb with the compressed directness of someone who had spent 3 decades in courtrooms without ever being in the room where anything was decided, and led him to a kitchen table where she had already laid out a folder. She sat across from him and she said without preface, "I have been her godmother her entire life. I love that girl. What I am about to show you is not something I do lightly or without serious prayer." The folder contained a lease agreement, 2-bedroom apartment in East Memphis, 12-month lease signed 9 months ago. Vanessa Wynn and Derek Ashworth, co-tenants. Caleb looked at the paper for a long time. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly still. He moved through the document the way he moved through every loan file he had ever reviewed, methodically, noting the date, the address, signatures, the notarization stamp. He read it twice. He folded nothing. He set it back down flat. "She signed this 4 months before she filed," Sandra said. She was maintaining both addresses, telling her mother she was at work events. She paused. "There's more. I don't have documents for the more, but I am telling you, she has been planning a specific outcome. The house was not incidental." He nodded. He asked no questions he didn't already know the shape of the answer to. He thanked Sandra. He drove back to his mother's house through the wet dark of a Memphis November, and he sat in the driveway for a moment before going in. His hands loose on the wheel, the city sounds settling around the car. A train somewhere east, the familiar hiss of wet pavement. He thought about what his grandfather had said. Every number has a story. Most people only read the first sentence. He had read further than most people. That was the thing Vanessa had never understood. She had looked at him and seen the work boots and the used Tacoma, and the way he ordered the second cheapest thing on the menu. She had read the first sentence and stopped. He went inside. He called a man named Franklin Cross. Franklin Cross was 58, semi-retired from a 22-year career as a bank examiner, and currently served as Meridian's chief compliance officer. He answered on the second ring, because he always answered on the second ring. "I need a full servicing history, pulled on a residential loan." Caleb said, "Property on Prescott Lane." And Franklin, "I need everything run clean and documented. Nothing informal." A pause. "This is the Prescott house." "Yes." Another pause. "Understood. Give me until Monday." Caleb thanked him and hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet. He was done asking questions he already knew the answers to. It was time to build the record that proved what he already knew. By the following Monday, Franklin had the servicing history. By Wednesday, Caleb had retained Patricia Okafor, a Charlotte-based family law attorney, who had been referred to him 2 years earlier through his estate planning counsel, and who had a reputation specifically for asset concealment cases, and had retained also a Memphis forensic accountant named Lewis Burke, who had once spent 14 months reconstructing the financial records of a dissolved municipal pension fund, and who looked at a spreadsheet the way most people look at a photograph, as a picture of something that actually happened. They met in a conference room at Franklin's office, 3 floors above a dry cleaner on Union Avenue, 2 blocks from the building where Caleb had first signed the Meridian founding documents 8 years ago. Lewis Burke laid out what he had found in the tone of a man describing weather. Vanessa had not simply had the deed redrawn. Over the preceding 14 months, she had systematically reorganized the marital estate in ways that were each, individually, defensible, or collectively, in Lewis's word, architectural. She had moved $41,000 from joint investment accounts to a personal savings account, opened in her name alone in August of the prior year. She had depreciated a design business she had been building since their 3rd year of marriage, accelerated the write-downs by 18 months, reducing the visible equity to near zero, and had transferred 2 commercial contracts worth a combined $73,000 in annual billings into a new LLC that listed only her name. She had changed the beneficiary designations on 2 accounts without notification. She had also, Lewis noted without inflection, initiated a formal appraisal of the Prescott Lane property 6 weeks before serving the divorce petition, an appraisal commissioned through a firm with no connection to any lender, generating no automatic notification to Meridian. She had been thorough. She had been patient. She had done her research on everything except the one thing that mattered most, the total that Lewis could document. $108,400, moved or restructured across 18 months. Beginning, he noted with the particular evenness of a man who recognized a pattern by its handwriting. 6 weeks after Vanessa had attended a professional development seminar in Nashville, a seminar Caleb confirmed she had attended with Derek Ashworth. $108,400 across 18 months. Beginning the week after Nashville, Lewis set the summary page on the table and squared its corners neatly and folded his hands. He said nothing further because the numbers said everything. Patricia set both palms flat on the document. "Tennessee's fraudulent concealment statute," she said, "is comparable to some of the strongest in the region. What she's done with the business equity restructure, specifically, creates significant exposure. The LLC formation combined with the contract transfers in the window immediately preceding a filing is exactly the kind of documented premeditation that courts respond to harshly She held Caleb's gaze. "I need to ask you one thing plainly. Is there anything about Meridian's institutional relationship to the Prescott Lane property that she might attempt to use as a conflict of interest argument?" Caleb considered this. "She knows I work in finance," he said. "She has never asked the specifics. She decided what I was in the first year and stopped asking questions after that." Patricia wrote something on her notepad. She underlined it once. "That," she said, "is going to matter a deal." He drove back to Orange Mound that evening through streets he had known since childhood, past the park where his grandfather had taught him to read a property survey, past the corner where Thomas Wynne had pointed at a building once and said, quiet as a man describing something sacred, "Building used to belong to someone who looked just like us. It can again." He had been 11. He had not forgotten. 3 weeks passed. He went to work. He returned board calls. He reviewed a small business lending proposal for a bakery in Fraser that was the kind of deal he liked. Patient capital, genuine community roots. A borrower who had been turned down twice elsewhere and had simply kept building the case. He approved it. He sat in on a quarterly compliance review. He attended his cousin's birthday dinner and ate too much sweet potato pie and laughed more than he had in months. He did not see Vanessa. He did not need to. Preparation was the work. He had never confused the preparation for the thing itself. 2 weeks before the mediation, Vanessa called him twice. The first call was about a lamp, a floor lamp they'd bought together on a trip to Savannah that she said she wanted back. He told her he'd leave it on the porch. The second call was about the mediation itself. She said she hoped they could keep it civil. He told her he had every intention of doing exactly that. He meant it. She took it as passivity. He let her. He had driven past Prescott Lane one evening during that period and sat at the corner for a moment, engine idling. The lights were on inside. He could see the kitchen window. He had replaced himself the second spring they lived there. Standing in the driveway on a cold Saturday, with a level and a new frame and his grandfather's field ledger on the tailgate, because he brought it everywhere then, a habit that had never left him. He had done careful work on that window. He had done careful work on everything he built in that house. He drove on. The mediation was convened on a Tuesday in December in a room at a neutral law firm on Poplar Avenue in East Memphis. Vanessa arrived with her attorney, a man named Carter Wells, who had a practiced ease that suggested he had conducted many of these proceedings and found most of them uncomplicated. She was composed and precisely dressed, and she carried the particular energy of someone who had decided the outcome of a meeting before walking in. Caleb was already seated when they entered. Patricia was to his left. Louis Burke was to his right. Across the table, the third chair between the legal teams, sat a person Vanessa had not expected. Franklin Cross, with a leather portfolio in front of him and an institutional logo embossed on the tab, a notary seal, embossed crest, which Vanessa read once and looked away from and then, after a moment, looked at again. Meridian Lending Partners, the same crest she had admired at the closing table on Prescott Lane 6 years ago and had not at the time paused to read. Carter Wells opened. He laid out the proposed distribution. The house, assessed current value, as the central marital asset in Vanessa's name by the redrawn deed. The business equity, the joint accounts. Patricia let him finish. Then she opened the first folder. She walked through the 18 months of transfers, the business restructure, the LLC formation, the contract reassignment. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She let Louis Burke's numbers speak in the flat, specific language of documented fact. Carter Wells made 2 objections, both of which she answered with a page number. Vanessa was very still. Patricia opened the second folder and slid it toward Carter Wells. "We'd also like to address the institutional relationship between the Prescott Lane property and Meridian Lending Partners," she said. "Specifically the existing mortgage, which was originated through Meridian and is currently in good standing." She paused. An entirely deliberate pause. "Mr. Wynn is the founding equity holder and a current board member of Meridian Lending Partners. He has been since the institution's founding. The mortgage your client believed she had secured as the primary marital asset is held, in its entirety, by an institution that missed her. Wynn helped build and has governed for 8 years. The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where the air pressure has changed. Vanessa turned and looked at Caleb directly for the first time since she had handed him the cardboard box. He met her gaze. He looked exactly as he had looked that morning in the doorway on Prescott Lane. Not cold, not triumphant, simply clear. The expression of a man who had always known what the numbers said and had simply been waiting for the right room. "I want to be fair about this," Caleb said. He spoke slowly and without theater. "I'm not here to take anything that isn't mine, but I want you to understand something clearly." He let a moment pass. "I have been in this city my entire life. I have been building things in this city, institutions, just houses for a decade. I am very good at it. And the only reason any of this conversation is happening the way it is happening is because you decided at some point that I was not paying attention." He looked at her steadily. "I am always paying attention." Vanessa's attorney leaned toward her and said something in a low voice. She did not respond to him. She was still looking at Caleb. "The foundation of what you were trying to build," Caleb said, "was standing on something that was already mine. That's not a metaphor." He gathered nothing because he had brought nothing. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out of the room and did not look back. Carter Wells, by all accounts, had a very long conversation with his client in the parking garage afterward. 11 months later, on a warm October morning, Caleb was on the porch of a house in Cooper Young, a 1940s craftsman he had purchased and was restoring board by board, the way he had always preferred to work. Drinking the first coffee of the day and watching the light move through the neighbor's persimmon tree, there was a woman beside him. Her name was Renee Alcott. She was a civil rights attorney who had grown up in Shreveport, moved to Memphis for a fellowship, and stayed for reasons she described as accumulative. She had a quality of complete presence that Caleb had noticed the first time they met at a Meridian Community Lending Forum, where she had asked 3 questions from the audience that were better than anything he'd prepared for the panel. They had talked for an hour afterward in the parking lot, which had felt like 10 minutes. She drank her coffee black. She was comfortable with silence, in the way only people who have truly made peace with their own thoughts can be. The Prescott Lane house had sold in March. The court had applied the fraudulent concealment credit in full. The restructured LLC and the transferred contracts had been valued and included in the marital estate. When the final distribution was complete, Vanessa had received considerably less than she had architected, and the 18-month plan had earned her a civil judgment for concealment damages that Louis Burke had calculated with the same weather reporting flatness he brought to everything. Derek Ashworth's design firm had lost 2 commercial accounts in the first quarter of the year. He had relocated his practice to Nashville. The East Memphis apartment lease had not been renewed. Vanessa was in residential interior design now, working independently. Caleb heard this through a mutual acquaintance and registered it without comment and moved on. The way you move on from a structural inspection report for a building you no longer own. Meridian Lending Partners had closed on its first mixed-use community development project in South Memphis in August, a block of affordable commercial storefronts and 8 residential units above them. The kind of project his grandfather had pointed at a ghost building and described 26 years ago. Caleb had stood at the ribbon cutting in August heat and shaken hands and smiled for a photograph and then gone home and sat on the porch of the Craftsman House and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has built something that will outlast the building of it. Renee looked over at him. "You're quiet." "I'm usually quiet," he said, differently quiet today. He considered this. "I was thinking about my grandfather," he said, something he used to say. She waited. She was good at waiting. He looked at the persimmon tree, the light coming through it in the unhurried way of a southern October morning that has nowhere to be. He said, "Every number has a story," Caleb said. Most people only read the first sentence. Renee was quiet for a moment. "And you read the whole thing?" He smiled. It was small and unhurried, the smile of a man who had no remaining argument with the shape of his life. "I read the whole thing," he said. "Some things were worth the patience to understand completely. The numbers, the institutions, the particular grain of the wood beneath your hands when the work is finally right." He had built everything worth keeping. He was not finished building. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.